Let's talk about the OPXY's shortcomings.
You know who it is.
First off, one thing that is oftentimes questionable with Teenage Engineering is the build quality. I heard of many people that had problems with the OPXY when they first got their unit delivered. I also had problems. 4 buttons on my unit weren't working, so I had to send it back to Teenage Engineering. Luckily, they sent one really quickly as a replacement, but that definitely is something to consider when buying such expensive gear. So especially when it comes to the warranty, I recommend buying this off dealers who have a 3-year warranty policy, for example, like Thomann in the EU. I don't know which retailers in the US have 3-year warranty, but especially in the US, it's important because Teenage Engineering only offers a limited 1-year warranty in the US. And that's the build quality out the way. And next thing is the interface. Teenage Engineering is known for making great interfaces. However, I think in the OPXY they have taken things a little too far when it comes to the size of their fonts. You can see here the numbers are still relatively legible, but the values that they adjust next to them are so tiny that you really need very good eyes to see them, and that is in good lighting conditions. So if, let's say, you would play this in sunlight, I think it would be almost impossible to read these values here. Why they did this, I don't know. In the OP1 field or the old OP1, it was much easier to read all the text on the display. It was much larger, and it's not like there isn't any space left on the display for the text. There's a whole lot of black space that could be filled, and you could make these texts a lot larger so they are easier to read. Yeah, I don't like having to have perfect eyesight in order to just about make out what it's saying. And next up, there is another thing about the interface that users who are coming from the OPZ may also dislike, and that is the lack of color coordination when it comes to the sequencer. In the OPZ, you had all kinds of LED colors for the sequencer. So if I put things in here and, for example, shifted a note to the left or to the right, I would have this indicated with, I believe, blue colored LEDs. If I put in step components on certain steps, I would have this indicated by green LEDs. I would have different indicators for the knobs that would show the value that they are set to, or the parameter page which I'm on, and the parameter pages would be shown in different colors. There was more visual feedback using colors, and on the OPXY they have decided to only use white and red for the auxiliary tracks, which I believe can be a little negative as the screen is so hard to see. Maybe colored indicator lights would be helpful at times, and I think can just set the functions apart and give you more immediate feedback. So that's something people from the OPZ might miss when they come to the OPXY. And again, this goes back to the OPXY now having a display, because yes, they have the display now, so maybe they can get rid of the color coding that was necessary in the OPZ, because the OPZ didn't have a display, so they needed this color differentiation. And on the OPXY, they got the display in there, so they don't need it. However, then the display should be better in terms of showing you what's actually going on and not having this minuscule font. Another point in terms of visual feedback that I think could be improved are the LFOs. First of all, the LFOs themselves are a little bit difficult to decipher when seeing them. And secondly, you don't get any visual feedback of what they are doing on the other parameter pages. So right now, I'm affecting the synth page and the first parameter, but I don't see anything moving here on the synth page. On the OP1 field, for example, if I would assign an LFO to any page, I would actually see the parameter moving like this on that page. So you always have to go to the LFO to know what it actually is assigned to. And also it would just be nice because it looks interesting if you got something moving there. The next thing I want to talk about is bugs, because I know many people have experienced bugs with the device, which leads me to believe they released it very prematurely. So some bugs are, when you turn the unit on, I sometimes immediately get an error message, so I have to turn it off and on again. A few more serious bugs that people have experienced, apparently they happen if you have loaded a lot of samples on the unit, and that is that it wipes the complete unit. So you could lose all of your projects, all of the samples you have loaded in it, if you have too many samples in the unit, which of course is something that shouldn't happen. And especially if you rely on an instrument like this for live performances for your work, it shouldn't just delete itself. Another bug is that the live microphone input does not work unless I plug a TRS cable in the input, which doesn't make sense at all, but yeah, that's another bug that's there. Should have been caught in testing. So now we get to a few more feature requests, or some things that I think are missing. One thing that is missing that was available in the OPZ that I used a lot and I think is very important, and they should definitely implement it again, is the ability to shift all the steps on one track right or left. So what I mean is, let me enter a sequence. So I've got these few steps here, and what if I wanted to shift all of them to the right or all of them to the left? It's just not possible. On the OPZ, I could just press the track button and then plus or minus, and they would be shifted left and right. And especially when you are improvising music, it might happen that the sequence you enter didn't really start on the 1, but somewhere off, and you want to shift it to the 1 properly. And that would have been the way to do it, but there's no opportunity to do it here. Although this button combo should actually do the trick, because right now it's only shifting the octave, which I can also do without pressing this. So this combination is actually unused and could be used for this. Another feature that I think could be implemented is when I got step components here in my sequence, and let's say I've got a nice sequence build up and I've got hundreds of step components added, and I want to just get rid of these step components but keep the notes in place. Right now, I do not think this functionality exists, so I would have to either delete the whole sequence or delete all step components manually. And I think one easy way to implement this would be by pressing the bar button and putting this as option number 3, clear all step components. Because right now we can clear all notes, or we can clear locked parameters, or we can clear everything but no step components. So there's the perfect place for this option. Another thing is summing the inputs to mono. So when you are on the sampler, you can actually sum your inputs to mono, meaning you have the left side and the right side, but you want to have them both in the middle, or rather both of them on both sides. And that is possible if you are in the sampler and you turn this knob left or right. There's no indicator for it yet on screen, but it does work. So you can turn either stereo on or mono on. But this functionality does not work for the external microphone, or rather TRS input. And that is something I wish for, because this would allow, for example, to use the external effects loop for 2 mono tracks by sending, let's say, the snare out to the right output, the kick out to the left output, sending them in 2 different effects units, and then pumping them back into the input and summing that to mono, so the kick and the snare with effects are now back in the middle. We have 1 or 2 more, and those concern my favorite track, the tape track. I've mentioned this on previous streams, but I want to mention it again for completion's sake. Another feature request of mine is the ability to play the tape track in reverse. This could be easily implemented by maybe an encoder click on this parameter, or shift and turn this encoder, but I think a click would be good, because who doesn't want to play their tape track in reverse? I know I do for sure. In addition to that, we need envelopes on the tape track, because right now when you trigger the tape track, it's always very choppy. So an option to have a little envelope that smooths out the edges is very important in my opinion. And again, this could be easily implemented with a shift functionality, for example. I would suggest shift and this one. And if you click the encoder, you either turn the envelope on or off. And turning the encoder would mean that you change the curve of the envelope. You go from a ramp down, so a quick start, and then it slowly falls off. And then you, as you turn the encoder, you shift it to more of a triangle, where it slowly fades in and slowly fades out, over to a ramp up, where it fades in and then drops off immediately. And that way you would have a perfect envelope for the tape track, easily implementable without getting rid of any other functions. Yes, and these I think are the problems of the OPXY, or my requests for improvements and just some new features that I think would make smart additions. But let me know, what do you think would be a great addition?